A millionaire was in a panic. His daughter wouldn't stop crying on the plane until a shy librarian did the unthinkable. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from? And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The plane hadn't even taken off yet, and Nathaniel Vanderbilt was already on the verge of a breakdown. Zoe, his 2-year-old daughter, was crying like the world was ending, and nothing, absolutely nothing, seemed to work. He had tried a bottle, toys, made up songs, even massaging her little feet, but the crying only got louder. With every passing minute, the looks around him grew more and more impatient. The luxury of first class now seemed completely useless in the face of his inconsolable baby's cries. Nathaniel, CEO of one of Chicago's biggest tech companies, a man used to meetings with billion-dollar investors and high-stakes decisions, was now totally exhausted. "Please, Zoe, calm down," he whispered, trying to stay composed. But Zoe wasn't negotiating. She kicked, reached out her arms, tossed the pacifier far away. A flight attendant came over with a tense look. "Can I bring you something, Mr. Vanderbilt? Maybe an extra pillow?" "Only if that pillow comes with superpowers," he replied dryly. She forced a polite smile and walked away. In economy class, Kelly Evans was trying to focus on her book. But the crying, echoing all the way from first class to the front row of economy, made that impossible. She had boarded the flight from Austin to Chicago with a simple goal: to relax with a good read. But now she was on the edge of losing her mind. Seeing that no one was doing anything, just sighing, whispering, or complaining, she felt strangely unsettled. She wasn't one to interfere. Never had been. But something about that crying hit her in a way she couldn't explain. Without thinking, she stood up and walked toward the curtain that separated the classes, took a deep breath, and stepped through. Nathaniel didn't even notice her approach. He was too busy trying to balance the baby in one arm while searching for the pacifier Zoe had thrown who knows where with the other. "Sorry to bother you," Kelly said, her voice shy. "Can I try to help?" Nathaniel looked at her, puzzled, as if trying to remember where he'd seen her before. I've tried everything," he replied. "She won't let anyone near her." "Sometimes it works better with someone who isn't the parent," Kelly insisted. "Mind if I try singing to her?" He hesitated for a second, then gave in, worn out. Kelly crouched down to Zoe's level without touching her. Zoe stopped squirming for a moment and looked at her with bright eyes still full of tears. Kelly gently picked her up and started to sing softly, a quiet, calming melody, like someone singing to the breeze. As she sang, she made slow motions behind the baby's head, drawing invisible circles of calm. Slowly, as if by magic, the crying began to fade. First, it turned into little sobs, then a sigh, and finally Zoe rested her head on Kelly's shoulder and fell asleep. Nathaniel stood there, speechless. What did you just do?" "A little trick my grandmother taught me," Kelly answered with a modest smile. He blinked, visibly relieved. "You're an angel disguised as a passenger." Kelly didn't reply. She just gently handed Zoe back to him. "Thank you," Nathaniel said quietly, almost moved. "You're welcome. Just keep your hold gentle. She trusts your arm now." Kelly stepped back and quietly returned to her seat in economy. She sat down with her heart racing, as if she had just done something completely crazy, and yet absolutely right. The rest of the flight was peaceful. Zoe stayed asleep, and Nathaniel, though tired, seemed to breathe easier. After landing in Chicago, Kelly gathered her things, ready to leave, when a flight attendant stopped by her side. "This is for you," she said, handing her a small envelope. Kelly opened it curiously. Inside, a short note written in elegant handwriting. "You saved my day. Thank you so much." She read it, smiled, and thought to herself, "I'll probably never see those two adorable people again." But she had no idea how wrong she was. 2 days later, Kelly Evans adjusted her blazer for the 3rd time in 5 minutes as she walked through the halls of the Lincoln Community Center. The interview for coordinator of the new children's library section was her big chance to finally land a decent job in Chicago. After 3 months of sending out resumes and only getting automated rejection emails, she was determined to make a good impression. "You've got this, Kelly," she whispered to herself, taking a deep breath. "It's just an interview. What could possibly go wrong?" The answer to that question came exactly 3 seconds later. As she turned the corner toward the waiting room, Kelly walked straight into something, or rather someone, pushing a baby stroller. The impact was so strong that she stumbled backward, dropping her folder and sending resumes flying across the floor like confetti at a party no one had planned. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," she blurted, quickly kneeling down to gather the papers. "No, it was my fault. I was just—" The familiar voice trailed off. Kelly looked up and nearly choked. Standing there with a pink baby stroller and a look of total surprise was Nathaniel Vanderbilt. The same man from the plane. The same polished CEO, now wearing a dress shirt with a suspicious carrot puree-looking stain on the shoulder. "You," they both said at the same time, pointing at each other. Zoe, comfortably nestled in the stroller, clapped her little hands when she saw Kelly, as if watching a particularly entertaining show. "What are you doing here?" Kelly asked, still half-crouched, holding a crumpled resume. "I could ask you the same thing," Nathaniel replied, running a nervous hand through his hair. "Are you following me?" "Following you? I didn't even know you existed until 2 days ago." Kelly stood up, clearly offended. "And even if I did, why would I follow someone who wears a suit to walk a baby on a Tuesday morning?" "This isn't a walk, Nathaniel paused, realizing how absurd the situation sounded. "Wait, why are you here?" "Job interview. Children's library coordinator. You?" Nathaniel opened his mouth to answer, but at that moment his shoulder bag, hanging from the stroller, suddenly came undone, spilling diapers, wet wipes, a baby bottle, and what looked like a jar of baby food across the reception floor. Kelly looked at the mess, then at Nathaniel, then at Zoe, who kept clapping like she was at the circus. "Seriously?" Kelly couldn't help but laugh. "You're the mystery investor who was supposed to meet the candidates today?" "How do you know about the investor?" Nathaniel asked, kneeling down to collect the diapers with the dignity of someone who just realized life has a very odd sense of humor. "Because the receptionist mentioned that one of the main project backers would be present," Kelly said, helping him gather the items, trying not to laugh at his mortified expression. "I just didn't imagine the backer would show up with his diaper team." "Very funny," Nathaniel grumbled, stuffing a wet wipe back in the bag. "And for your information, I didn't plan to bring Zoe. The nanny quit a week ago, and I'm handling everything myself." "A week?" Kelly stopped laughing. "You've been taking care of her all by yourself for a whole week?" "Technically, it's 6 days, 14 hours, and," he checked his watch, 42 minutes. "But who's counting?" Zoe chose that moment to reach her arms out toward Kelly, making that sweet little sound only babies make when they want something. "She wants to go with you," Nathaniel said, a mix of surprise and relief in his voice. "Hi, sweetheart." Kelly moved closer to the stroller, and Zoe immediately grabbed her finger tightly. "Have you been giving Daddy a hard time?" As if she understood the question, Zoe giggled and pointed at Nathaniel, who was still struggling to zip up the stubborn bag. "Looks like she's saying yes," Kelly laughed. "And honestly, I think she's right." "May I interrupt this lovely family moment?" A voice cut through the air. Kelly and Nathaniel turned to see a middle-aged woman holding a tablet, with a look like she'd just witnessed something that definitely wasn't in her schedule. "Mrs. Patterson." Nathaniel quickly stood up, trying to switch to professional mode. "This is Kelly Evans, one of the candidates." "I see that," the woman said, eyeing the mess on the floor, and then Kelly, who was still holding Zoe's hand. "Miss Evans, I'm sorry to say we'll have to reschedule your interview." "Reschedule?" Kelly's stomach sank. "Why?" "A minor issue in the meeting room. Ceiling leak." Mrs. Patterson sighed. "Could we move it to Thursday?" Kelly nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. 2 more days of waiting and uncertainty. "Perfect." Mrs. Patterson tapped something on her tablet. "Mr. Vanderbilt, can you also return Thursday for the formal interview?" "Of course," Nathaniel replied, then turned to Kelly. "Listen, since you've apparently saved my sanity twice in 3 days, how about a coffee? As a thank you." Kelly hesitated. There was something about this man that made her nervous, and not just because he was rich and powerful. It was the way he seemed genuinely lost when it came to caring for his daughter, yet tried so hard to get everything right. "I'm not sure," she began. "Please," Nathaniel said with a half-smile. "I need the company of someone who speaks in full sentences and doesn't drool on my shirt." Zoe picked that exact moment to drool on his shirt. Kelly burst out laughing. All right, she said, still laughing, but only because she's got perfect comedic timing. Great. Nathaniel looked genuinely relieved. I know a place nearby that's stroller-friendly and doesn't judge food stains on expensive clothes. How specific, Kelly said as she picked up her folder. Do you go to a lot of places like that? Lately, they're the only ones I go to, he admitted, pushing the stroller. My social life now revolves around nap schedules and places with diaper-changing tables. Welcome to the real world, Kelly laughed. It's not as glamorous, but it's more honest. As they walked together down the hallway, Kelly couldn't help but think how strange life was. 2 days ago, she was just an anonymous passenger trying to read in peace. Now she was heading to have coffee with a millionaire who carried diapers in his bag and talked about nap routines. Can I ask you something? Kelly said when they reached the front door. Sure. Why don't you just hire another nanny right away? I mean, you probably have the resources for that. Nathaniel paused for a moment, looking at Zoe, who was playing with a colorful plastic toy. Because, he sighed, because she turned down the last 3, and honestly, I didn't really trust them either. It's hard to leave your daughter with someone you barely know. Kelly felt a tug in her chest. There was something so vulnerable in the way he said that, so different from the confident CEO image. I understand, she said softly. Besides, he added, my daughter seems to have very specific preferences when it comes to caregivers. Zoe, as if she knew she was being praised, giggled and waved at Kelly. She definitely knows how to win people over, Kelly smiled. Vanderbilt family, Nathaniel said, pushing the stroller down the sidewalk. Irresistible charm is a genetic trait. Modesty too, apparently, Kelly replied dryly. Nathaniel laughed, a real laugh, not the polite kind she imagined he used in business meetings. You'll find out, Kelly Evans. Modesty isn't exactly one of my strengths. What a surprising revelation, she murmured, but she was smiling. When they arrived at the cafe, Kelly realized that for the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about interviews, jobs, or the stack of bills waiting for her at home. She was just present, in the moment, with this strange man and his sweet daughter who had somehow made her day a whole lot more interesting. And for some reason, it didn't scare her as much as it probably should. The next day, after handing out more resumes, Kelly was arriving at her apartment when she saw the envelope stuck to her door. For a moment, her heart jumped with hope. Maybe it was a positive response from a job interview. But when she tore it open, reality hit her like a bucket of cold water. Eviction notice. 15 days to vacate the property. Perfect, she muttered, leaning against the hallway wall. Just perfect. Kelly read the letter 3 times, as if the words might magically turn into something less catastrophic. 3 months behind on rent. She knew this day was coming, but she'd always managed to delay it with vague promises to the landlord about payments coming soon. 15 days, she repeated to herself as she climbed the stairs. In 15 days, I'll be living under a bridge, talking to pigeons and begging for coffee money. When she walked into the tiny apartment she called home, Kelly dropped onto the worn-out couch and looked around. There wasn't much to pack anyway. Her belongings could fit in 2 suitcases and a few cardboard boxes. What really worried her was where she'd go. Her family lived in Iowa, and going back there would mean admitting Chicago had been a huge mistake. Her friends were all just as broke, or living with 3 roommates in apartments the size of closets. Maybe I can negotiate with the landlord, she said out loud, though she knew full well that Mr. Henderson had the heart of a rock and the flexibility of a brick. The sound of her phone interrupted her worries. An email. Kelly opened it without much interest, expecting another automatic rejection. Dear Miss Evans, due to yesterday's inconvenience, we'd like to reschedule your interview for today at 2 p.m. Sincerely, Lincoln Community Library. Kelly looked at the clock. 12:15. If she hurried, she could make it on time. Well, she said, standing up from the couch, at least I can be rejected in person instead of by email. 2 hours later, Kelly walked out of the library with a stunned smile and the feeling that the universe was playing a joke on her. She'd gotten the job. Children's section coordinator, decent salary, benefits included. The only catch? She wouldn't start for 30 days. 30 days, she muttered, walking down the sidewalk. I've got 15 days to find a place to live and 30 days before I start earning money. The math is not working in my favor. That's when her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Kelly? This is Nathaniel. Nathaniel Vanderbilt. Oh. She stopped walking. Hi. How did you get my number? Mrs. Patterson gave it to me. Listen, I know this might sound strange, but can I meet with you? I have a proposal you might be interested in. Kelly looked around as if someone might be filming this surreal moment. What kind of proposal? Work-related. Can you meet me at the coffee shop we went to yesterday? Let's say in an hour? Kelly hesitated. All right, but if you're planning to pitch me some pyramid scheme or sell me vitamins, I'm out. Nathaniel laughed on the other end. I promise, no vitamins involved. An hour later, Kelly met Nathaniel at the same coffee shop, this time without Zoe and with a nervous look she hadn't seen before. Where's your personal assistant? Kelly asked as she sat down. Zoe's with my secretary, Nathaniel said, running his hand through his hair. It's temporary, very temporary. Let me guess, Kelly leaned in. Your secretary didn't sign up for this. She's thinking of quitting, he admitted. Apparently, market analysis doesn't include diaper duty. Kelly laughed. I can imagine. So what's this mysterious proposal? Nathaniel took a deep breath. I heard you won't start at the library for 30 days, and I need help with Zoe, just temporary. 2 weeks at most, while I find a proper nanny. In return, I'll offer you a place to stay and fair pay. Kelly blinked several times. You want me to live in your house and take care of your daughter? She asked, making sure she heard correctly. When you say it like that, it sounds like a weird internet ad, Nathaniel admitted. But yes, that's basically it. Kelly looked at him like she was trying to solve a very complicated puzzle. And why do you think I'd agree to this? Because, Nathaniel leaned forward, you managed to get my daughter to stop crying in 5 minutes, and you seem to be the only person she actually likes, besides me. And you? Me what? Do you like me? Kelly asked, then blushed deeply. I mean, do you trust me enough to leave your daughter in my care? Nathaniel smiled. Not the polite executive smile, but something more real. Kelly, you walked through a first-class curtain to help a stranger with a crying child. You didn't ask for anything in return. That tells me more about your character than any reference ever could. Kelly thought about it. On one hand, it was completely crazy. On the other, she was about to be evicted and didn't have many options. 2 weeks? 2 weeks. And I'd have my own room? You'd have your own wing, Nathaniel replied. The house is big. All right, Kelly said at last. But if Zoe decides she doesn't like me anymore, the deal's off. Fair. And if you decide I'm a terrible stand-in nanny, not gonna happen. How can you be so sure? Because Nathaniel reached out to shake on it. My daughter has excellent judgment. The next day, Kelly stood in front of a house that looked like it came out of an architecture magazine. Perfect lawn, a 3-car garage, and a fountain, an actual fountain, right at the entrance. He wasn't kidding about the house being big, she murmured, carrying her 2 suitcases. Nathaniel opened the door before she even rang the bell. Welcome to organized chaos, he said, grabbing one of her bags. Zoe has decided today is the day to reject all food that isn't mashed potatoes. Great, Kelly said with a nervous laugh. The first dinner was, without a doubt, a comedy of errors. Kelly was so nervous she spilled a full glass of water all over the marble kitchen floor. Nathaniel tried to be the perfect host, but Zoe had other plans. Just as he bent down to clean up the water, she flung a spoonful of mashed potatoes straight onto his Italian suit. Zoe, he exclaimed, looking down at the orange stain on his chest. Kelly burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. The whole scene was just so absurd. Her on the floor trying to mop up the water with paper napkins, him with mashed potatoes dripping down his tie, and Zoe clapping her hands like she had just seen the best show of her life. Nathaniel looked at Kelly laughing, then at Zoe clapping, and finally started laughing too. A genuine, contagious laugh that filled the elegant kitchen. Welcome to the most dysfunctional family in Chicago, Kelly said between laughs. Hey, Nathaniel protested, still chuckling. We're just creatively disorganized. That night, after bath time and several failed attempts to put Zoe to bed, the little one refused to stay in her crib. She cried every time Nathaniel tried to lay her down, reaching her arms toward Kelly and only calming down when she was in her arms. I'm sorry, Nathaniel said, clearly exhausted. She's never been like this before. It's okay, Kelly said, rocking Zoe gently and humming quietly. Sometimes changes make kids feel uncertain. Nathaniel watched silently as Zoe slowly relaxed in Kelly's arms, her eyes gradually closing. There was something about that scene, Kelly softly humming, Zoe finally at peace, the soft light from the lamp casting a warm glow, that made something tighten in his chest. "Thank you," he whispered when Kelly finally managed to lay Zoe in the crib without waking her. "You're welcome," Kelly whispered back. "Good night, Nathaniel." "Good night, Kelly." As Kelly was almost to her bedroom door, her phone rang. She looked at the screen and made a face. "Mom?" she answered, trying to keep her voice low. "Kelly, honey, I have wonderful news. I'm coming to visit tomorrow. Send me your address." Kelly closed her eyes and leaned against the wall. "Mom, tomorrow's not a great day." "Nonsense. I already bought the ticket. I arrive at 2 in the afternoon. I can't wait to see your little apartment." The call ended before Kelly could object. She stood in the hallway, staring at the phone like it was something from another planet. "Little apartment," she muttered. "That's going to be interesting to explain." A few minutes later, Kelly sent her mother Nathaniel's address. Now she just had to figure out how to explain to her mom that she was living with a millionaire and taking care of a child who wasn't hers. "One thing at a time, Kelly," she whispered to herself. "One thing at a time." The next day, Kelly was tidying up her room when she heard the doorbell. She ran to the window and saw a taxi parked in front of the mansion. A woman with gray hair and a purse the size of a small suitcase was paying the driver. "My mom," Kelly whispered, feeling panic rise. She really came. Kelly rushed down the stairs, finding Nathaniel in the living room with Zoe in his arms, both looking curious about the commotion. "My mom's here," Kelly announced, trying to fix her hair. "I tried to cancel, but she—" The doorbell rang again, longer this time. "Just breathe," Nathaniel said calmly. "We'll just explain everything." "You don't know my mother," Kelly muttered as she walked to the door. "She has her own theories about everything." Kelly opened the door and was immediately pulled into a hug that smelled like floral perfume and motherly determination. "Kelly? My darling?" Mrs. Evans stepped back, holding her daughter's face. "You look different. Are you eating well?" "Hi, Mom," Kelly said with a forced smile. "What a surprise to see you here." "Surprise? I told you I was coming." Mrs. Evans looked over Kelly's shoulder and her eyes went wide. "Oh my goodness, Kelly, you didn't tell me you had a boyfriend." Kelly turned to see Nathaniel standing at the entrance of the living room, still holding Zoe, his face a mix of politeness and panic. "Mom, no, he's not." "And you have a baby," Mrs. Evans practically shouted, walking into the house without waiting for an invitation. "Kelly Marie Evans, when were you going to tell me I'm a grandmother? I know it's been over a year since we saw each other, but you could have said something. I would have brought presents for my granddaughter." "Mrs. Evans," Nathaniel stepped forward, trying to stay composed. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'm Nathaniel Vanderbilt, and this is my daughter Zoe. Kelly is just—" "Nathaniel," Mrs. Evans interrupted, reaching out her hand with energy. "What a strong name. And just look at this house. Kelly, you didn't tell me you had found yourself a man with money." Kelly buried her face in her hands. "Mom, please let me explain." "There's no need to explain anything, dear," Mrs. Evans said, winking at Nathaniel. "Young man, I hope your intentions with my daughter are serious. She may seem shy, but she's got a strong personality when she wants to." I'm sure," Nathaniel replied, completely lost. Zoe chose that moment to stretch her little arms toward Kelly, babbling happily. "Look at that!" Mrs. Evans clapped her hands. "The baby recognizes her mommy. How precious!" "Mom, she's not mine," Kelly said quickly, picking Zoe up. "Mom, please sit down. I'll explain everything." 20 minutes later, after a confusing explanation involving dramatic hand gestures from Kelly and polite attempts at clarification from Nathaniel, Mrs. Evans finally got the picture. "More or less. So you're a temporary nanny," she said, looking suspiciously between Kelly and Nathaniel, "and the two of you are not dating." "Exactly," Kelly confirmed. "Yet," Mrs. Evans murmured, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mom." "What?" "I'm just pointing out that you look at each other in a very interesting way." Nathaniel cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe I should start dinner." "Great idea," Mrs. Evans stood up. "I'll help. I've always wanted to see a millionaire's kitchen." Dinner was a cinematic-level disaster. Mrs. Evans asked questions ranging from slightly awkward to completely invasive, always at a volume loud enough to be heard in the next county. "So, Nathaniel," she said while cutting her chicken with determination, "Kelly told me you lost your wife. I'm very sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Nathaniel answered quietly. "How long has it been?" "Mom," Kelly warned. 2 years, Nathaniel replied. "Ah, so you're past the official mourning period," Mrs. Evans announced. "Good to know you're ready to move on." Kelly nearly choked on her water. "That's not exactly how it works, Mom." "Of course it is, dear. I read in Modern Living magazine that 2 years is the ideal time to recover from a loss and be ready for a new relationship." Nathaniel stopped eating entirely. "And Kelly's always been great with kids," Mrs. Evans continued, completely unaware of the discomfort she was causing. "When she was little, she looked after every baby in the neighborhood. She has a natural maternal instinct." "I can confirm that," Nathaniel said, looking at Kelly with something she couldn't quite read. "See?" Mrs. Evans turned to her daughter. "He already sees your good qualities. That's a good sign." Kelly buried her face in her hands again. "Mom, you're embarrassing everyone." "Nonsense. I'm just being friendly." Zoe, who had been quiet for most of dinner, decided it was time to share her thoughts on the situation. She banged her little spoon on the table and let out a high-pitched squeal of joy. "See?" Mrs. Evans beamed. "Even the baby agrees with me." After what felt like hours, Mrs. Evans finally announced it was time to go back to her hotel. Kelly walked her to the taxi, promising to visit the next day. "He's a good man, Kelly," her mother said, adjusting her purse. "And it's obvious you like each other." "Mom, we barely know each other." "Nonsense. I saw the way you looked at each other during dinner, and the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." She shook her head. "Reminds me of the way your father used to look at me." Kelly felt something tighten in her chest. "Mom? Just don't let fear get in the way, sweetheart. Sometimes the best things in life show up when we least expect them." After the taxi drove off, Kelly returned home and found Nathaniel in the kitchen, washing dishes with a thoughtful look on his face. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately. "My mom can be a lot." "She's interesting," Nathaniel smiled gently. "And clearly cares about you a great deal." "Sometimes I think she cares too much," Kelly said, grabbing a dish towel to help, "especially when it comes to my non-existent love life." "Non-existent?" Kelly blushed. "Well, not exactly non-existent, more like complicated, or non-existent because of the complications." Nathaniel chuckled softly. "I understand completely." They worked in silence for a few minutes, an oddly intimate atmosphere settling between them. Kelly realized that, despite the chaos at dinner, something had shifted. Her mom's awkward questions had sparked a conversation they might never have had otherwise. "Nathaniel," Kelly said at last, drying the final plate, "can I ask about Zoe's mom?" He stopped washing the pan, his hands still in the soapy water. "Sarah," he said softly. "Her name was Sarah. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." "Actually," he turned off the faucet and faced her. "I think I need to. No one's ever asked. Everyone acts like she never existed." Kelly set the dish towel on the counter and waited. "She died during childbirth," Nathaniel said, his voice barely a whisper. "Complications no one saw coming. One minute she was holding my hand, laughing about the name we chose for Zoe, and the next—" His voice broke. Without thinking, Kelly reached out and touched his hand. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to take care of a baby," he went on, staring at their hands. "I didn't know how to be a father on my own. I thought if I hired the best nannies, provided the best of everything, it would be enough. But Zoe rejected everyone. Until you showed up." Kelly felt her eyes fill with tears. "You're doing a wonderful job. Anyone can see how much you love her." "Sometimes I'm afraid it's not enough," Nathaniel admitted. And for the first time since Kelly met him, his voice trembled. "That she'll grow up missing something I can never give her." "Nathaniel," Kelly squeezed his hand, "love is enough. And you have plenty of love to give." That's when the tears came. Quiet tears that ran down Nathaniel's face, speaking of 2 years of buried pain, of sleepless nights wondering if he was doing everything wrong, of a loss he had never fully allowed himself to process. Kelly didn't say a word. She just stayed there, holding his hand, letting him feel what he needed to feel. When he finally composed himself, they moved to the back porch. The night was clear, stars visible even with the city lights. "Thank you," Nathaniel said, sitting beside her on the wooden swing. "For what?" "For letting me talk about her. For not trying to comfort me with cliches." "We all need to talk about the people we love," Kelly replied, "even when they're no longer here." They sat in silence for a while, the swing gently moving. Kelly was aware of every breath he took, the way the porch light cast shadows across his face, the way his presence made her feel safe and vulnerable all at once. "Kelly," Nathaniel finally said. "Yes?" "I'm glad you walked through that curtain on the plane," she smiled. "So am I." "Well, I think it's late. I'll head to my room." Nathaniel simply nodded. The next morning, Kelly woke up to the sound of tense voices coming from Nathaniel's office. She went downstairs and found the door slightly open, letting fragments of the conversation reach her. "What do you mean the contract was canceled?" Nathaniel's voice was tight. "We had an agreement." Kelly hesitated, unsure whether to walk away or see if he needed anything. Her decision was made when she heard the sound of something hitting the desk. 6 months of work, Nathaniel continued on the phone. 6 months, and they suddenly decide they want another supplier? Kelly gently knocked on the door and stepped in. Nathaniel looked at her, phone still to his ear, with a mix of anger and worry on his face. "We'll talk about this later," he said into the phone and hung up. "Everything okay?" Kelly asked. Nathaniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of stress. "Work issues," he said simply. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Kelly could see it in the tension in his shoulders, in the way he stared at the papers scattered across the desk. It was far more serious than he let on, and for some reason, that worried her more than she wanted to admit. In the following days, the house that had become a warm, welcoming refuge began to feel more like an emergency office. Nathaniel had turned the dining room into a command center, with papers spread across every surface and 3 phones ringing at intervals that seemed designed to create maximum stress. Kelly watched all of it, while trying to keep Zoe entertained on the living room rug, away from the growing chaos. The little girl seemed to sense the tension in the air. She was fussier than usual, refusing to eat properly and waking up several times during the night. "No, and no," Nathaniel's voice echoed down the hallway. "I don't care if they want to renegotiate. The original deal was perfectly fine." Kelly winced and turned to Zoe, who was chewing on a rubber toy with a puzzled look on her face. "Your daddy's having a tough time at work," she said softly. "But don't worry, he'll be okay." As if she disagreed with Kelly's hopeful statement, Zoe spit out the toy and started to whimper. I know," Kelly said, picking her up. "You're feeling the tension too. How about we read a book?" But even Zoe's favorite story about the adventurous bunny couldn't compete with the rising volume of Nathaniel's voice coming from the dining room. "What do you mean you need 3 more weeks to decide?" he shouted. "This project should have been done yesterday." Kelly sighed. Over the past 3 days, Nathaniel had become an intensified version of himself, waking up at 5 in the morning to call international suppliers, glued to the phone all day, barely eating. Whenever Kelly tried to bring him a sandwich, all she got was a distracted nod of thanks. She didn't know anything about corporate business, but she did understand people under pressure, and Nathaniel was clearly reaching his limit. Kelly placed Zoe in the playpen and walked to the home library, an impressive room with bookshelves stretching from floor to ceiling. She scanned the shelves until she found what she was looking for. A section of books on management and leadership, most with serious covers and intimidating titles. "Perfect," she muttered, picking out 2 books she remembered reading back when she worked at the public library in Iowa. One was about crisis management, and the other about leading under pressure. Kelly returned to the dining room and found Nathaniel on the phone, waving at a spreadsheet in frustration. "Sorry to interrupt," she said softly, placing the books on the table beside him. Nathaniel glanced at the books, then at her, looking confused. "Books? They're about crisis management," Kelly explained quickly. "I read them when I was studying library science. There might be some helpful strategies in them." "Kelly," Nathaniel said, covering the phone with his hand, "I appreciate the thought, but I don't have time to read children's stories about business right now." Kelly blinked, surprised by the sharpness in his voice. These are serious books, written by. We'll talk about it later, he said, already turning back to the call. Yes, I'm still here. No, that's not acceptable. Kelly stood there for a moment, feeling strangely small. Then she picked up the books and walked out of the room. The next day, things only got worse. Zoe woke up crying at 5 in the morning, refused breakfast, and spilled juice all over the clean clothes Kelly had just put on her. Meanwhile, Nathaniel was already on the phone before brushing his teeth, his voice echoing through the house like a constant drumbeat of frustration. "It can't be that hard to find a new supplier," he yelled, storming through the kitchen. "Do the research. Do your job." Kelly was trying to convince Zoe to eat at least one full of oatmeal when the little one decided it was more fun to throw the food on the floor. Just as Kelly bent down to clean up the mess, Nathaniel walked into the kitchen. "Kelly, have you seen my contract with Morrison Industries?" It was on the living room table, but... He stopped suddenly when he saw the oatmeal all over the floor and Zoe with messy hands, laughing at her own mischief. "Seriously?" he snapped. "You can't even keep a 2-year-old clean during breakfast?" Kelly stood up slowly, cleaning rag still in hand, and looked at him with a mix of shock and disbelief. "Excuse me?" "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair. "It's just that I've been looking for that contract for 20 minutes and you thought it was a good idea to take out your frustration on me?" Kelly interrupted, her voice dangerously calm. "That's not what I—" "That's exactly what it was," Kelly said, placing the rag in the sink harder than necessary. "Zoe, sweetie, let's go for a walk." "Kelly, wait." "No." She turned to him. "You clearly need some time to cool off, and the two of us need some fresh air." Kelly lifted Zoe from the high chair, grabbed the diaper bag, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Nathaniel standing there like he'd just been struck by lightning. 3 hours later, Kelly returned with Zoe asleep in the stroller and a calmer look on her face. She found Nathaniel sitting on the back porch, staring out at the garden with a cup of cold coffee in his hands. "Kelly," he stood as soon as he saw her. Before you say anything," Kelly said, locking the stroller brake, "I need to say a few things." Nathaniel nodded, looking like he was ready to take a well-deserved scolding. "I understand you're under pressure," Kelly began, sitting on the porch swing. "I get that losing an important contract is stressful, and that you feel responsible for a lot of people. But what you can't do is treat the people around you like tools that exist only to make your life easier." "You're right," Nathaniel said immediately. "I was completely unfair." "I'm not finished," Kelly raised her hand. "You have this habit of treating everything like a problem to solve, including people. Your secretary isn't a computer you can reprogram. Zoe isn't a project you can optimize. And I'm not an employee you can scold when things don't go as planned." Nathaniel sat heavily in the chair next to her. "You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. Truly sorry." "Why do you do that?" Kelly asked, her voice softer now. "Why do you need to control everything?" Nathaniel was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Because I'm scared," he finally admitted. "I'm scared that if I don't keep everything under control, it'll all fall apart. The company, my ability to take care of Zoe, everything." "And when did someone tell you that you had to manage everything on your own?" "Since Sarah died," his voice came out as a whisper. "Everyone just looked at me, waiting for me to know what to do. The lawyers, the doctors, the employees, everyone assumed I had a plan, so I pretended I did." Kelly felt a tightness in her chest. "Nathaniel, you don't have to pretend with me." "I know," he looked at her. "It's just hard to stop. After 2 years of acting like you're in control, you forget what it's like to admit you're not." "Can I tell you a secret?" Kelly leaned forward. "No one's really in control. Everyone's just making it up as they go and hoping for the best." Nathaniel laughed, a broken but genuine sound. "That's both comforting and terrifying at the same time." "Welcome to adulthood," Kelly smiled. "Population? Everybody pretending they know what they're doing." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching Zoe sleep peacefully in her stroller. "About those books you suggested?" Nathaniel finally said. "Do you really think they could help?" "I don't know," Kelly answered honestly. "But what you're doing now clearly isn't working. Maybe it's worth trying something different." "Can you show me which ones?" Kelly smiled. "Sure. But first you're going to take a shower, eat something that's not coffee, and spend at least an hour playing with your daughter without thinking about work. That sounds dangerously close to not being in control. Exactly, Kelly stood up. Let's see if you can survive it. Later that night, Kelly found Nathaniel in the library, leaning over one of the books she had recommended. She brought him a cup of tea and set it beside him. Anything interesting? Actually, yes. He looked up, surprised. This chapter on effective delegation, I never thought about it this way. What do you mean? The author talks about the difference between delegating tasks and delegating authority. I always delegate tasks, but I never really let people make decisions. Kelly sat in the armchair next to the table. And does that make sense to you? Unfortunately, it makes a lot of sense, Nathaniel sighed. I think I just figured out why my team calls me for everything. I never really let them handle anything on their own. Then maybe it's time to start trusting them. Nathaniel closed the book and looked at her. How did you get so wise about things that aren't even in your field? Librarians read a lot. Kelly smiled. And we watch people. You learn that most human problems are just variations of the same few themes. And what's my basic theme? Kelly thought about the question carefully. Fear of not being enough. So you try to make up for it by being everything to everyone. The simplicity of the observation hit him like a punch in the stomach. That's uncomfortably accurate. The good news is you don't have to be everything to everyone, Kelly stood. You just need to be a dad to Zoe and a boss to your company. And even that doesn't have to be perfect. As Kelly walked upstairs to her room, Nathaniel stayed in the library for a few more hours, reading about leadership strategies he had never considered before. For the first time in days, his mind wasn't spinning in circles of panic. Maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his own. The next morning, Nathaniel woke up with a fresh energy Kelly hadn't seen in weeks. He was in the kitchen by 7 a.m., wearing a perfectly pressed dress shirt and holding a cup of coffee like it was a victory trophy. Good morning, he greeted Kelly with a smile. The new nanny, Miss Kimberly, arrives at 9. She has an excellent resume, great references, and experience with difficult children. Kelly, still in her pajamas with hair that looked like it had been through a blender, raised one eyebrow at him. Difficult child? Zoe's not difficult, Kelly said. She's just selective. Exactly, Nathaniel said, picking up a piece of toast. And Kimberly is an expert with selective children. Kelly poured herself some coffee, trying to ignore the strange feeling in her stomach. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? For Nathaniel to find a proper nanny so she could get back to her own life? I'm sure everything will work out just fine, she said, trying to sound convincing. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Kelly was upstairs changing Zoe when she heard voices at the entrance. Curious, she stepped closer to the staircase and got a look at the new nanny. Miss Kimberly was everything Kelly wasn't. Tall, elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a posture that practically shouted professional efficiency. She wore a navy blue suit that looked like it came straight out of a guidebook on how to dress to impress wealthy parents, and carried a leather folder that probably cost more than Kelly's old apartment rent. Kelly came down the stairs with Zoe in her arms, who immediately buried her face in Kelly's neck at the sight of the stranger. Miss Kimberly, this is Kelly, and this little one is Zoe, Nathaniel said, making the introductions. Pleasure to meet you, Kimberly said, offering Kelly a polished smile and a firm handshake. I hear you've been filling in here temporarily. You must be eager to get back to your regular life. Kelly shook her hand, trying to figure out whether there was a hint of sarcasm in that comment. Well, Kelly's been wonderful, Nathaniel interrupted, but I know she has her own plans. Zoe chose that exact moment to peek at Kimberly from over Kelly's shoulder, eyeing the new candidate with the seriousness of a judge at a beauty pageant. Hello, Zoe, Kimberly said with carefully measured enthusiasm. Aren't you a little sweetheart? Zoe quickly hid her face again. She's a bit shy around new people, Kelly explained. Of course, Kimberly nodded knowingly. That's perfectly normal. In a few hours, we'll be best friends, right, Zoe? Zoe didn't respond, but Kelly could feel her holding onto her shirt a little tighter. The first 30 minutes went surprisingly well. Kimberly showed off her efficiency by organizing Zoe's toys by color and category, explaining to Nathaniel the benefits of a structured routine, and flipping through her folder full of age-appropriate learning activities. Kelly watched from a distance, trying to convince herself she was glad Nathaniel had found someone so qualified. But there was something about the way Kimberly spoke about Zoe, as if she were a project to manage, not a child to love, that didn't sit right with her. "Now let's test her reaction to a brief separation," Kimberly announced. "Miss Kelly, would you mind stepping out for a few minutes?" Kelly looked at Nathaniel, who nodded encouragingly. "All right," she said, kissing the top of Zoe's head. "I'll be right back." The moment Kelly stepped out of the room, the crying began. Not a soft whimper, but a full-blown, panicked scream that made Kelly freeze on the stairs. "This is normal," she heard Kimberly say. "She needs to learn how to handle transitions." But the crying didn't stop. It kept going, and going, and going. 15 minutes later, Kelly couldn't take it anymore and went back into the room. She found Zoe on the floor, her face red from crying, arms outstretched toward the door. Kimberly was seated in an armchair, checking a stopwatch like it was part of a science experiment. Kelly rushed over and Zoe practically jumped into her arms. "It's all right, sweetheart." "Miss Kelly," Kimberly said, offering a tight smile, "this doesn't help the adaptation process." "The process can wait 5 minutes," Kelly replied, gently rocking Zoe until her sobs faded. The next day, things didn't get better. Zoe flat out refused to eat anything Kimberly offered, cried every time she got close, and developed the habit of chasing Kelly around the house. "She just needs time," Nathaniel kept saying, though Kelly could see the concern growing in his eyes. "Of course," Kimberly agreed, scribbling something into her little notebook. "Initial resistance is common in spoiled children." Kelly stopped folding Zoe's clothes. "Spoiled?" "Well, yes," Kimberly said, adjusting her glasses. "It's clear she's been overindulged and hasn't learned proper boundaries." "She's 2, Kelly said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Exactly the age when firm boundaries need to be introduced." Kelly looked at Zoe, who was playing quietly on the floor, and wondered if she and Kimberly were even talking about the same child. The next afternoon, while Kelly was in her room organizing a few things, she heard a soft knock at the door. She opened it to find Zoe standing there, arms raised, with a look that clearly said, "Please get me out of this situation." "Hi, sweetheart," Kelly said as she picked her up. "What are you doing here?" "Mama," Zoe said, pointing down the hallway, as if explaining that she had escaped from a particularly unpleasant situation. Kelly carried Zoe over to the bedroom window, where they could see Kimberly in the garden, talking on the phone with an exasperated look on her face. "Looks like you two aren't getting along very well," Kelly murmured. "Mama," Zoe agreed, resting her head on Kelly's shoulder. The next day, the conflict finally reached its limit. Kelly was in the kitchen preparing an afternoon snack when she heard raised voices coming from the living room. "No, Zoe," Kimberly's voice was clearly irritated. "You can't just reject all healthy food." Kelly walked closer to the doorway and saw Zoe sitting on the floor, arms crossed, staring at Kimberly with a defiant expression that would have been impressive on a 10-year-old, let alone a 2-year-old. "Zoe, you're going to eat this carrot or we're going to have to talk about consequences," Kimberly went on. Zoe pushed the plate away. "This child is impossible," Kimberly sighed, turning and noticing Kelly at the door. "Miss Kelly, could you please explain to Zoe that tantrums are not acceptable?" "Actually," Kelly stepped into the room, "I think she's just expressing her preferences." "Preferences?" Kimberly repeated as if the word were a foreign concept. "She's 2 years old. She eats what the adults decide she should eat." "Or," Kelly said, crouching down to Zoe's level, "we could ask what kind of snack she'd like today." "That's exactly the kind of permissiveness that leads to manipulative behavior," Kimberly said, crossing her arms. Kelly felt a warm rush rise in her chest. Manipulative behavior? It's obvious she's learned to get what she wants by creating a scene. She's a spoiled and manipulative child. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the front door opening. Nathaniel had arrived home from work, and from the sound of his quick steps he had heard at least part of the conversation. "What's going on here?" he asked as he entered the room. "I was just explaining to Miss Kelly the importance of—" Kimberly started. She called Zoe spoiled and manipulative. Kelly cut in, picking the little girl up. Nathaniel went very quiet. Very quiet. She said, "What?" "Mr. Vanderbilt, I was simply pointing out that." Kimberly tried to explain. "Leave," Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously calm. "Excuse me, leave my house, now." "Mr. Vanderbilt, if I may explain." "There's nothing to explain," he said, his voice rising slightly. "No one calls my daughter manipulative. Get your things and go." Kimberly looked from Nathaniel to Kelly, then to Zoe, as if trying to understand how things had escalated so quickly. "Very well," she said, adjusting her briefcase with wounded dignity. "But you'll see that excessive spoiling is not real love. And you'll learn that judging a 2-year-old isn't professionalism," Nathaniel replied, opening the living room door meaningfully. After Kimberly left, a strange silence fell over the room. Zoe, who had watched the whole scene with wide eyes, suddenly smiled and clapped her hands as if she'd just watched a particularly entertaining performance. "Well," Kelly said finally, "that was something." Nathaniel ran his hands through his hair. "Kelly, I need to ask you a favor." "Of course. Would you stay? Permanently? As Zoe's nanny?" Kelly looked at him, then at Zoe, who was still smiling in her arms. "Nathaniel, I'm supposed to start at the library in 5 days. I'll pay 3 times the library salary," he said quickly. "And you can keep living here. Your own wing, remember?" Kelly thought for a moment. It was a generous offer. Very generous, but it would mean giving up the library job and the plans she had made for her life. "It's a tempting offer," she said at last. "So you'll stay?" Kelly looked at Zoe, who chose that moment to plant a loud, exaggerated kiss on her cheek, making them both laugh. "All right," Kelly sighed. "I'll call the library tomorrow." "Really?" "Really. But if you hire another Kimberly, I'm running out the door." "No more nannies," Nathaniel promised. "Only you." That night, after putting Zoe to bed, Kelly found Nathaniel in the kitchen, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "To celebrate," he said, handing her one. "Celebrate what? The fact that I gave up my career plans to be a full-time nanny?" "To celebrate that my daughter finally has someone who truly understands her," he replied, raising his glass. They clinked their glasses gently, and Kelly realized she was standing closer to him than necessary. Close enough to notice he was wearing expensive cologne. Close enough to see the small wrinkles around his eyes when he smiled. "Kelly," Nathaniel said, placing his glass on the counter. "Yes?" "Thank you for staying, for caring for her as if she were." "As if she were mine," Kelly finished softly. He nodded, and suddenly the space between them seemed filled with an electricity Kelly didn't quite know how to interpret. Nathaniel leaned in slightly toward her, and she realized she wasn't moving away. "Kelly," he whispered. "Yes?" But before either of them could decide what to do at that moment, a sharp cry echoed through the baby monitor. "Zoe," they said at the same time, quickly stepping apart. "I'll go," Kelly said, already heading for the stairs. "Kelly," Nathaniel called. She turned. "Good night." "Good night, Nathaniel." As she climbed the stairs to comfort Zoe, Kelly couldn't stop thinking about the moment that had almost happened in the kitchen. And more troubling, the fact that a part of her wished Zoe hadn't woken up. Some things were more complicated than they seemed, and her new job as a nanny was quickly becoming one of them. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened in Nathaniel Vanderbilt's life. He began putting into practice the strategies from the books Kelly had recommended, and the results were surprisingly positive. Instead of micromanaging every decision, he started giving his team real authority. When a supplier canceled a contract, instead of panicking, he gathered his staff and simply said, "You know what to do. I trust you." The effect was almost magical. His secretary stopped thinking about quitting. His team began solving problems without bombarding him with frantic phone calls. And to his surprise, the company didn't just recover. It started thriving in ways he hadn't seen in years. "You seem different," Kelly said one morning, finding him in the kitchen making pancakes. Real pancakes, not just coffee and anxiety. "Different how?" "Less like someone who's always waiting for the world to catch fire." Nathaniel laughed, flipping a pancake with more confidence than she expected. "Maybe it's because I've learned that sometimes the world will catch fire, and that doesn't mean I have to be the only firefighter around." "Look at you being philosophical before 8 a.m., Kelly smiled, settling Zoe into her high chair. "That's progress." Zoe clapped her hands when she saw the pancakes, letting out a happy squeal that made them both laugh. "Actually," Kelly said, pouring orange juice, "I was thinking maybe it's time for us to get out of the house a little. When's the last time you two went to a park?" Nathaniel paused mid-pour, the batter still dripping from the ladle. "A park?" "Yes. You know, grass, trees, kids running around, very popular among people with small children." "I know what a park is," he said, sounding slightly offended. "It's just that, well, I've never thought about taking Zoe to one." "Why not?" Nathaniel thought for a moment as he stacked the pancakes on a plate. "I suppose I always saw parks as places where things could go wrong. Zoe might get hurt, or eat sand, or have fun, get exercise, and have normal childhood experiences." "That too," he admitted with a smile. "All right, let's try this park thing." 2 hours later, they were at Millennium Park with a picnic basket Kelly had packed, and Zoe wearing a little yellow dress that made her look like a tiny ray of sunshine. "See?" Kelly said, laying out a blanket under a tree. "The world didn't end just because we left the house." "The day's still young," Nathaniel muttered, but he was smiling. Zoe, who had been quiet during the short walk to their perfect spot, suddenly lit up at the sight of other kids playing nearby. She pointed toward the playground, babbling something that sounded like a mix of go and now. "Looks like someone has an opinion about our plans," Kelly laughed. "All right, little one." Nathaniel stood up and held out his arms to Zoe. "Let's explore." What followed were 2 of the most enjoyable hours either of them had had in a long time. Zoe discovered that sand was fascinating to dig in, that slides were exciting, and that ice cream, bought from a street vendor, was clearly the best invention ever. The problem with the ice cream became clear about 10 minutes after they bought it, when Zoe decided it was more fun to smear the treat all over her clothes than actually eat it. "No, Zoe?" Kelly said, trying to wipe the little girl's face with a napkin. "Ice cream goes in your mouth, not on your dress." But Zoe had other ideas. She laughed and rubbed her sticky hands through her hair, turning her blonde curls into what looked like an abstract artwork made of strawberry and vanilla. "Well," Nathaniel said, taking pictures with his phone, "at least she's having fun." "Says the man who won't be giving her a bath later," Kelly replied. But she was laughing too. The scene became even funnier when Zoe, apparently tired of standing still to be cleaned up, decided to make a run for the playground. Kelly jumped up to follow her but didn't notice that the blanket was caught under the picnic basket. The result was a spectacular stumble that left her sitting in the grass with a completely stunned expression. "Very graceful," she muttered to herself, pulling leaves out of her hair. Nathaniel couldn't hold it in. He laughed, a genuine, loud, contagious laugh, as he helped Kelly back to her feet. "You okay?" "My dignity took a hit, but physically I'm fine," Kelly replied, brushing the grass off her clothes. "Now, where's our little runaway?" They found Zoe at the slide, still sticky with ice cream but glowing with joy. Nathaniel kept snapping pictures. Zoe on the swing, Kelly gently pushing her. Zoe feeding ducks at the pond, with more bread landing in the water than reaching the ducks. The 3 of them lying on the blanket, looking up at the sky and imagining shapes in the clouds. "That one looks like an elephant," Kelly pointed to one especially fluffy cloud. "I see a giant bunny," Nathaniel disagreed. "Papa," Zoe chimed in, pointing to a completely different cloud. "She's clearly right," Kelly laughed. "That's definitely a papa." When they got back home in the late afternoon, they were all tired, a little messy, and oddly happy. Zoe had fallen asleep in the stroller on the walk back, with traces of ice cream still behind her ears. "That was," Nathaniel began, carrying the empty picnic basket. "Chaotic, messy, completely unlike anything you'd usually plan?" "Perfect," he finished. "I was going to say perfect." Kelly smiled, feeling something warm spread through her chest. "Dinner?" "Leave it to me," Nathaniel said confidently. "I can cook." "Are you sure? Because I've got numbers for at least 3 takeout places." "Absolutely sure," he interrupted. "How hard can it be?" 45 minutes later, Kelly was sitting on the kitchen floor, laughing until tears ran down her face, while Nathaniel tried to wave away the smoke pouring from the oven. "I said I could cook," he said, looking at what used to be lasagna. "I didn't say I was good at it." "It's artistic charcoal," Kelly managed to say through her laughter. "Very modern." "Very burnt," Nathaniel corrected, joining her on the floor. "Pizza?" "Pizza," she agreed. While they waited for the delivery, they stayed on the kitchen floor, Zoe playing between them with colorful blocks. And Kelly realized that this simple, unglamorous moment was the closest she had ever felt to being home. "Kelly?" Nathaniel said suddenly. "Can I show you something?" "Of course." He got up and returned a few minutes later with a wooden box Kelly had never seen before. "These are letters Sarah wrote," he explained, sitting next to her again. "Some for me, some for Zoe." Kelly looked at the box like it was something precious and fragile. "Do you read them?" "The ones to me, yes, sometimes. But there's one she wrote for Zoe to open when she's older, and I've never been able to read it." "Why not?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, watching Zoe stack her blocks with serious focus. "Because once I write it, she's really gone. As long as there's something of hers I haven't read, it feels like there's still one more conversation to have." Kelly felt tears sting her eyes. "But Nathaniel, maybe the point isn't to end a conversation. Maybe it's to start something new." He looked at her, then at the box, then at Zoe. "Would you read it with me?" "If you want me to." With slightly trembling hands, Nathaniel opened the envelope marked, "For my little Zoe, when you're old enough to understand." The letter was short, written in Sarah's delicate handwriting, full of love and hope for a daughter she never got the chance to meet. It talked about dreams she had for Zoe, how she hoped she would be brave and kind, and how she wanted her to know she had been loved even before she was born. At the end, there was one line that made them both cry. "And I hope your daddy finds someone wonderful to love you both the way you deserve." "Nathaniel," Kelly whispered, her words barely audible. "She knew," he said, his voice thick. "Somehow, she knew." Kelly reached out and took his hand, gently interlacing their fingers. "She wanted you to be happy." "And I do." He turned to look at her. "I want to be happy, with you." What happened next felt as natural as breathing. Nathaniel leaned in toward her. Kelly didn't pull away, and when their lips met, it felt like all the scattered pieces of their lives had finally clicked into place. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, then deeper, more certain. Kelly felt like she was both falling and flying, as if everything in her life had led to this exact moment. When they pulled apart, they stayed like that for a moment, breathing in sync, foreheads touching, while Zoe played happily at their feet, completely unaware that the world had just changed. "Kelly," Nathaniel began. But before he could continue, the phone rang. Loud and persistent, shattering the moment like glass. Nathaniel looked at the phone, then at Kelly, clearly torn. "Answer it," she said softly. "It could be important." "Vanderbilt," he said into the phone, his voice still a little rough. Kelly watched his expression shift as he listened, relaxed to focused to concerned. "When?" he asked. "It can't wait until Monday?" "I see. Yes, I'll be there tomorrow." He hung up and turned to Kelly with an apologetic look. "Problem in Portland. I need to fly out tomorrow, 2 days, maybe 3. "Oh," Kelly said, trying to hide the disappointment in her voice. "Kelly," he took her hand again, "would you stay with Zoe until I get back?" She looked at him, then at Zoe, who had just stacked 4 blocks and was clapping for herself. "Of course," she said. "We'll be fine." "Thank you." He kissed her forehead gently. "I'll be back as soon as I can." That night, as Kelly put Zoe to bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the kiss, about Sarah's letter, and about the strange feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Some changes, she thought, come like storms. Others arrive like a kiss in someone's kitchen, soft and as inevitable as the sunset. The next morning, Kelly woke to the sound of Nathaniel's cab pulling out of the driveway at 5:30. She stretched in bed, listening to the unusual stillness of the big house, and suddenly it hit her. She was alone with Zoe for the next 2 days, completely alone, responsible for a 2-year-old in a mansion that still sometimes felt like a museum. "All right, Kelly," she murmured to herself, slipping on her robe. "How many people take care of kids? Millions, billions. You can do this." The first challenge came 20 minutes later when Zoe woke up crying because Daddy wasn't there to say good morning like he always did. "I know, sweetheart." Kelly picked her up and gently rocked her. "Daddy went to work, but he'll be back soon. In the meantime, it's just the 2 of us, and we have very important plans today." "Dada?" Zoe asked, looking around with sleepy eyes. "Daddy's coming back," Kelly promised. "But first, How about some breakfast? And then we can read stories. Lots of stories. The morning turned out to be surprisingly peaceful. Kelly discovered that Zoe was a very enthusiastic audience for her character voices, clapping whenever Kelly pretended to be a roaring lion or a hooting owl. They spent a full hour in the library, with Zoe pointing to different books and Kelly making up stories on the spot just from the pictures on the covers. And then, Kelly said dramatically, pretending to read a book about a dog, the brave little dog decided he wanted to fly like a bird. Woof woof, Zoe added, smiling. Exactly, Woof Woof said, I'll try, and climbed the tallest tree he could find. It was during the third made-up story that Margaret, the housekeeper, appeared in the doorway with a tray of tea. Sorry to interrupt, she said with a warm smile. I thought you might like a little snack. Margaret, you're an angel, Kelly sighed. I was just wondering how I was going to manage lunch without leaving Zoe alone. Miss Kelly? Margaret set the tray down on the low table. May I say it's a pleasure to see you with little Zoe like this? What do you mean? Well, Margaret adjusted the napkins neatly. Mr. Nathaniel has always been very structured with the girl's routine. Time for this, time for that. But you let her be a child. Kelly looked over at Zoe, who was trying to turn the pages of a book upside down. I'm not entirely sure I know what I'm doing, to be honest. No one really knows, Margaret said with a soft laugh. But love always works better than manuals. After lunch, Kelly decided it was time for Zoe to learn something new. How about we learn a song? She suggested, sitting down at the piano in the music room. Kelly didn't know how to play the piano. Her musical skills were pretty much limited to singing in the shower, but she found she could press a few keys and make a simple melody while she sang. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, she sang, pressing random keys that sounded vaguely musical. To her surprise and delight, Zoe tried to sing along, making melodic sounds that were almost recognizable as music. Ink, ink, Zoe sang, clapping her hands. That's right. Kelly clapped too. You're singing. They spent the whole afternoon creating their own version of classic children's songs, with Kelly on her improvised piano and Zoe providing enthusiastic, if not always in tune, vocals. Later in the afternoon, Robert, the driver, found the two of them in the kitchen trying to make cookies. Or rather, Kelly trying to make cookies, while Zoe supervised from her high chair, occasionally contributing flour scattered all over the counter. Need a hand? He offered, seeing the colorful mess that had once been a spotless kitchen. Do you know how to make cookies? Kelly asked, hopeful. My wife always says I'm better at following recipes than navigating Chicago traffic, Robert smiled. And that's saying something. With Robert running the operation and Kelly providing constant entertainment for Zoe, they managed to bake 24 cookies that were only slightly burned around the edges. Success, Kelly declared, biting into a warm cookie. Zoe, we've proven we can make edible food. More or less edible, Robert added with a laugh. The next day, Kelly woke up feeling more confident. She had made it through her first day alone with Zoe, without any disaster bigger than flour on the kitchen floor. Maybe she actually did know what she was doing. That confidence lasted until 9 o'clock that night, when a strong storm swept through Chicago. Kelly was reading to Zoe in her bedroom when she noticed the little girl felt warmer than usual. Zoe? She said, placing her hand on the toddler's forehead and feeling her stomach sink. You've got a fever. Zoe was clearly uncomfortable, crying in a way Kelly had never heard before. Not the usual tired or cranky crying, but something that sounded like real pain. Kelly tried to stay calm. Fevers in children were common, she knew that. But Zoe kept getting hotter, and her quiet cries were turning into heartbreaking wails. It's okay, sweetheart, Kelly murmured, walking around the house with Zoe in her arms. We'll take some medicine and you'll feel better soon. But even after giving her the proper medicine and trying every soothing trick she knew, Zoe's fever wouldn't go down and the crying wouldn't stop. Kelly looked at the clock. 10:30 p.m. Nathaniel was probably asleep, getting ready for his big meeting the next day. She hesitated for a full 5 minutes before dialing his number. Kelly? His voice came on, instantly alert. What's going on? Zoe has a fever, Kelly said, trying to keep her voice steady. A high one. I gave her medicine, but she won't stop crying and she feels really hot. How long has it been? An hour, maybe an hour and a half. She heard movement on the other end, Nathaniel getting dressed by the sound of it. "I'm coming home. Nathaniel, you don't have to. It's just a fever. I can handle it." "Kelly," his voice was firm but kind, "you two are more important than any meeting. I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 2 hours." While she waited, Kelly kept walking around the house with Zoe, singing softly, trying anything to calm her down. Margaret came out in her pajamas and robe, offering help and moral support. Robert even showed up, ready to drive them to the hospital if needed. "You don't all have to stay up," Kelly said, overwhelmed. "Miss Kelly," Margaret said firmly, "this family looks after each other, and you're part of this family now." 2 hours later, Kelly heard the sound of a car pulling up quickly in the driveway. Nathaniel rushed through the front door, still in a wrinkled suit, his hair a mess. "How is she?" he asked, holding out his arms right away. "About the same," Kelly said, handing Zoe over and noticing how the little girl calmed slightly at the familiar touch. "Her temperature's still high, but it hasn't gone up anymore." Nathaniel held Zoe close against his chest, whispering soft words as he gently felt her forehead. "Hey there, little one," he murmured. "Daddy's here. You're okay now?" Kelly watched the way he held Zoe, the way his voice softened into something gentle and protective, and she felt a tightness in her chest. He had left an important business meeting, possibly the one that could save the contract they had lost, to come home because his daughter was sick. 2 hours later, Zoe's fever finally went down. She was sleeping peacefully in Nathaniel's arms, breathing softly, her skin finally back to normal temperature. "Thank you," Nathaniel said quietly, looking at Kelly, "for taking care of her, for calling me, for everything. You don't have to thank me for doing my job." "This isn't just your job," he said, his voice serious. This is you caring for her like she was your own." Kelly felt her eyes sting with tears. "I do care. Probably more than I should." The next day, after Zoe woke up completely recovered and full of energy as if nothing had happened, Nathaniel found Kelly on the porch, sipping coffee and looking out at the garden. "May I sit?" "Of course." They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to Zoe play in the living room with Margaret. "About last night," Nathaniel began. "You missed your important meeting," Kelly said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He turned to look at her. "It got rescheduled, and even if it hadn't, I would have made the same choice." "Why?" "Because the two of you mean more to me than any deal." Kelly felt her heart start to race. "Nathaniel." "Kelly, we need to talk about the future, about what's happening between us." "I know," she sighed. "And I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "Of getting too attached," she admitted. "To you, to Zoe, to this life. And then finding out it was only temporary." Nathaniel took her hand. "Kelly, look at me." She turned to meet his eyes. "I don't want to lose you, not as Zoe's nanny and not as whatever it is we're becoming. Do you understand that?" "I do," she said softly. "But what if things change? What if you meet someone who fits your world better?" "My world," Nathaniel repeated, smiling gently, "is a house where my daughter laughs, where someone burns dinner and doesn't mind, where I get to be a dad instead of a CEO. That's my world now, and you're right in the center of it." Kelly felt the tears begin to form. "You're sure?" "I'm sure I want to find out where this goes," he said. "If you do too." Kelly looked back at the house behind them, where she could hear Zoe laughing with Margaret, at the garden where they'd had picnics, at the man sitting beside her who had dropped everything to come home when they needed him. "I do," she said finally. "I want to find out too." Nathaniel smiled, not the polished smile of a businessman, but something warm and genuine that made Kelly realize she might have finally found where she truly belonged. "Well," he said, standing up and holding out his hand, "how about we start with breakfast? I promise not to burn anything today." "We'll see," Kelly laughed, taking his hand. "But I'm keeping the pizza place on speed dial, just in case." As they walked back into the house together, Kelly realized that for the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about the future with anxiety. Instead, she was simply happy to be exactly where she was, in that moment, with the people who had become her family in ways she never could have planned. 2 days later, Kelly thought it would be a good idea to take Zoe for a surprise visit to Nathaniel's office. After all, he had mentioned several times how much he missed his daughter during long work days, and Zoe always got excited when she heard the word "daddy." "Let's go surprise Daddy," Kelly said as she dressed Zoe in a pink dress that made her look like a little doll. "Da-da!" Zoe clapped her hands, clearly approving the plan. Nathaniel's office was on the 32nd floor of a glass and steel skyscraper in downtown Chicago, with a view that made Kelly feel a little dizzy. The receptionist recognized them immediately and escorted them to his office with warm smiles. "Surprise?" Kelly said, appearing in the doorway with Zoe in her arms. Nathaniel's face lit up in a way that made Kelly's heart skip a beat. "What a wonderful surprise," he said, standing and reaching out for Zoe. "How are my two favorite girls?" Kelly felt a strange warmth at the phrase, "my two girls," but tried not to overthink it. They spent a lovely hour at the office, with Zoe fascinated by the skyscrapers she could see through the window, and Nathaniel clearly more relaxed than Kelly was used to seeing when he was in work mode. A few coworkers stopped by to say hello, all of them commenting on how big Zoe had gotten and how obvious it was that she adored Kelly. "I need to get back to a meeting," Nathaniel said reluctantly. "But how about dinner out tonight? The three of us?" "Sounds perfect," Kelly smiled. "We'll let you get back to work." Kelly was waiting for the elevator with Zoe when she heard familiar voices coming from the hallway nearby. Two women in suits, apparently executives, were talking as they walked. "Is that his new girlfriend?" one of them was asking. "I think so," the other replied. "Pretty, but she seems kind of ordinary." Kelly stopped pressing the elevator button, curious despite herself. "Well, you know Nathaniel," the first voice continued. "He always gets involved temporarily with employees, then disappears. Remember the marketing assistant? And that HR consultant?" "That's right," the second woman laughed. "He has a pattern. A few weeks of romance, then he goes back to being his usual cold CEO self. I bet this one won't last 2 months. Kelly felt her blood run cold. The elevator arrived with a ding, but she could barely move to step inside. "Mama?" Zoe asked, noticing the sudden change in Kelly's mood. "It's okay, sweetheart," Kelly whispered, but her mind was racing. Employees. He had a pattern. Temporary romance. All the way home, the words echoed in Kelly's head. "Is that what I am? Just another woman in a string of temporary flings? The nanny who happened to be convenient for something more?" Kelly tried to convince herself that the women were just gossiping, that they didn't really know anything. But the doubt had been planted, and it grew like a poisonous weed. At dinner that night, Kelly was quieter than usual. Nathaniel, who had come home cheerful and talking about weekend plans, gradually realized something was wrong. "Are you okay?" he asked. After several attempts at conversation received nothing more than one-word replies. "I'm fine," Kelly said, pushing her food around on the plate. "Kelly," Nathaniel set down his fork, "you're clearly not fine. What happened?" Kelly looked at him, this man who had come to mean so much to her, and wondered if she was being naive. Was she just a temporary phase in his carefully organized life? "It's about us," she said finally. "What about us?" Maybe I should leave." The silence that followed was deafening. Nathaniel froze, like her words had the power to stop him completely. "You want to leave?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Kelly hesitated. Part of her wanted to shout no, to explain about the women at the office, to hope he would convince her she was wrong. But the scared part, the part that had been hurt before, whispered that it was better to leave before being left behind. "Maybe it's for the best," she said, hating how those words sounded, even coming from her own mouth. Nathaniel slowly nodded, but Kelly could see something break behind his eyes. "If that's what you want," he said, "I'll respect your decision." "Thank you," Kelly whispered, feeling like she was watching her life fall apart. The next morning, Kelly woke up with a heart as heavy as stone. Nathaniel had left early for work, leaving only a note saying she could take all the time she needed to get organized. With tears streaming down her face, Kelly began to pack her few belongings. There wasn't much. 2 suitcases, a few boxes of books, and memories from a few months that had completely changed her life. Before leaving, she decided to stop by Nathaniel's office to leave the keys and say a proper goodbye. But as she walked into the room, something on his desk caught her eye. It was a photo of the 3 of them, Nathaniel, Kelly, and Zoe, taken on the day of the picnic at the park. Zoe was sitting on Kelly's lap, covered in ice cream, and the 3 of them were laughing like it was the happiest moment in the world. Kelly turned the photo over and read the message Nathaniel had written in his handwriting. The person who made me happy again and brought laughter back into this home. The tears came harder now. Kelly clutched the photo to her chest, feeling the full weight of her mistake. The women at the office didn't know anything. They were gossiping, making assumptions based on who they thought Nathaniel was, not who he really was. Kelly ran through the house, looking for him. "Margaret," she called. "Where's Nathaniel?" Margaret appeared in the kitchen with a sad expression. "Oh, Miss Kelly, he left this morning with little Zoe. Said they were going to visit his sister in Milwaukee for a few days." "For a few days?" "Yes, dear. He seemed quite down when he left." Kelly leaned against the wall, feeling like the ground had vanished beneath her feet. She had ruined everything. Because of gossip, because of fear, because of her own insecurity, she had thrown away the best thing that had ever happened in her life. The house, which had always felt warm and full of life, now felt empty and cold. Without Zoe's laughter echoing through the halls, without Nathaniel popping into the kitchen to sneak bites of whatever Kelly was cooking, without the sense of family that had grown between them, the mansion was just a big, silent building. Kelly went upstairs to her room and sat on the bed, holding the photo and realizing she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She had let fear win over love, insecurity over trust, and now she didn't know if she would get a second chance to make things right. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room. Outside, it began to rain, as if the sky itself were crying for missed chances and the words that should have been spoken, but never were. A few hours later, Kelly was putting the last book into the box when Margaret gently knocked on the bedroom door. "Miss Kelly?" The housekeeper stepped in with an envelope in her hands. "Mr. Nathaniel left this for you before he left." Kelly took the envelope with trembling hands. Her name was written in Nathaniel's familiar handwriting, and for a moment she hesitated to open it, afraid of what she might find inside. The letter was long, handwritten on company stationery, but the words were deeply personal. "Kelly, I don't know why you decided to leave, but I respect your choice. Maybe I misread the signs. Maybe I assumed things I shouldn't have. But I need you to know a few things before we go our separate ways. I fell in love with the way you care for Zoe, not out of duty, but as if she were the most precious treasure in the world. I fell in love with the way you laugh quietly when you think no one is watching, like you're keeping small joys to yourself. I fell in love with the books you carry everywhere, the quiet wisdom you share without realizing, the courage it took for you to walk through that first-class curtain on the plane and change our lives forever. I never planned for this. After Sarah, I thought my heart was permanently shut. But then you arrived, with your genuine laughter and your made-up stories, and suddenly, my house was alive again. I can't imagine the future without you. I can't imagine Zoe growing up without your silly songs and your park adventures. I can't imagine my life without someone who makes me want to be a better man, a better father. If you feel the same, if there's even a chance that we're throwing away something real, I'm at my sister's house in Houston. The address is on the back. If you don't come, I'll understand, and I'll always be grateful for the months you made our house feel like a home. With all my love, Nathaniel. P.S. Zoe keeps asking for her mama. I think she understood something I took too long to realize. Kelly finished reading the letter with tears streaming down her face. She turned the page and found an address in Houston, just 5 hours away by bus. Margaret, who had waited patiently by the door, stepped closer. "Miss Kelly, may I say something?" Kelly nodded, still holding the letter. "In 20 years working for Mr. Nathaniel, I've never seen him as happy as he was these past few months. And little Zoe, she bloomed with you here. Sometimes the best things come disguised as complications." Kelly looked at the letter, then at her packed suitcases, then at the photo still in her hands. "Margaret, do you think it's too late to fix this?" "Dear," Margaret smiled, "it's never too late for true love." The next day, Kelly stood at the Chicago bus station, wearing a simple navy blue dress and carrying a small suitcase. In her other hand, she held a children's book about a family of ducks she'd picked up on the way. It felt fitting for a new story waiting to begin. The bus ride to Houston was the longest of her life. Kelly shifted between hope and fear, imagining what she would say when she arrived, whether Nathaniel would be happy to see her or if he had already changed his mind. When she finally arrived at the address, Kelly stood on the sidewalk for a full 5 minutes, gathering her courage. The house was smaller than the mansion in Chicago, cozier, with a front yard where she could see a small child playing. "Zoe! Mama!" Zoe shouted the moment she saw Kelly, dropping her toys and running toward her with her little arms stretched out. Kelly knelt down and hugged Zoe tightly, feeling like an important part of herself had just fallen back into place. "Hi, my little one," she whispered. "I missed you." "Kelly?" She looked up and saw Nathaniel standing on the porch, a surprised expression on his face, and something that looked like hope. Kelly stood up, still holding Zoe, and walked over to him. Without saying a word, she handed him the children's book. "I think it's time to start a new story," she said, her voice slightly trembling. Nathaniel stepped down from the porch and wrapped both her and Zoe in an embrace. "I missed you so much," he whispered against her hair. "I missed you too," Kelly replied, "and I'm sorry for running away, for doubting us." "It doesn't matter," Nathaniel said. "You're here now." They pulled apart slightly, and Kelly saw that Nathaniel looked nervous in a way she had never seen before. "Kelly, before we go inside, there's something I need to do." To her surprise, he gently placed Zoe on the ground and took a small velvet box from his pocket. And right there in the front yard, with Zoe clapping beside them, Nathaniel got down on one knee. "Kelly Evans," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. "You came into my life trying not to draw any attention, a quiet passenger just trying to read in peace. But you changed everything. You changed my daughter, you changed my home, you changed my heart." Kelly covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming freely. "Will you be part of this beautiful mess, officially and forever?" Nathaniel asked. "Yes," Kelly said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes." Nathaniel slid the ring onto her finger and stood up to kiss her, but was interrupted by Zoe, who wrapped her arms around their legs, turning it into a group hug that made them all laugh. "Family," Zoe declared, and Kelly swore she could hear her speak more clearly than ever before. That night, they celebrated with a dinner that was a delightful disaster. Nathaniel tried to cook something special but burned the chicken. Kelly spilled wine onto the candles, which tipped dangerously, and Zoe managed to smear mashed potatoes across 3 different chairs. "To our crazy little family," Nathaniel said, raising a glass of apple juice since the wine had spilled all over the table. "To second chances," Kelly added. "Mama, Dada," Zoe chimed in, clinking her plastic cup against theirs. Later, as they cleaned up the mess, Kelly looked around the small, that messy kitchen. At the man drying dishes while one of the candles still smoked sideways on the table. At the little girl helping by reorganizing napkins on the floor, and thought she had never seen a more perfect scene in her life. A few days later, they returned to Chicago with Zoe asleep in Kelly's lap and the engagement ring softly catching the light of the airplane. Nathaniel had insisted they fly back, saying that after all the recent drama, they deserved a bit of comfort. "Welcome home, newly engaged," Margaret greeted them at the door with a beaming smile and a tray of champagne. The entire staff is eager to hear all the details. "How do you already know?" Kelly asked, surprised. "Mr. Nathaniel might have called from the airport," Margaret admitted with a wink. "We waited a few minutes before popping the cork." Robert appeared, carrying their bags, grinning from ear to ear. "Congratulations, Miss Kelly. Or should I say, future Mrs. Vanderbilt? Kelly still works," she laughed. "At least until I get used to the idea." After putting Zoe down for a nap, Kelly and Nathaniel settled into the study for the most important call of the day. Kelly's mom appeared on the screen with an expectant look. "Mom," Kelly began, trying to stay composed, "we have some news." "You finally admitted you're dating?" Mrs. Evans asked bluntly. "A bit more than that," Nathaniel appeared on screen, taking Kelly's hand and showing the ring. The scream Mrs. Evans let out probably woke the neighbors in Iowa. "I knew it. I knew it from that very first dinner. Kelly Marie Evans, why didn't you tell me he was going to propose?" "Because I didn't know," Kelly laughed. "It was a complete surprise." "When's the wedding? Where's it going to be? How many guests? Have you picked the flowers yet?" "Mom, breathe," Kelly said. "We just got engaged 2 days ago. 2 days is an eternity in wedding planning time, her mom declared. I need to start calling everyone right away. Nathaniel looked at Kelly with a slightly alarmed expression. Everyone? My family is enthusiastic, Kelly explained, and large. 2 weeks later they had set a date, a simple Saturday in the garden, just close family and a few dear friends. Kelly wanted something small and meaningful, not a Hollywood production. How many people do you think your mom will bring? Nathaniel asked on the Thursday before the wedding. She said it would be just close relatives. Kelly answered as she arranged the final flower details. Maybe 10 people at most. On Friday afternoon, 3 vans pulled up at the front of the house. Kelly looked out the window and felt the blood drain from her face. Nathaniel, she called, her voice strangely calm. Remember when I said 10 people? Yes? I may have slightly underestimated my mother's definition of close relatives. 32 of Kelly's relatives poured out of the vans like clowns from a circus car. There were uncles, aunts, cousins, second cousins, and some people Kelly was pretty sure she had never seen before, but who were apparently third-degree relatives by marriage. Nathaniel stood at the entrance, watching the peaceful invasion with the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly tricky logistics problem. Well, he finally said, at least we know the party will be lively. Are you panicking? Kelly asked, concerned. I'm calculating how many rooms we have and whether I can turn the library into a temporary bedroom, he admitted. But no, I'm not panicking. This is your family, and tomorrow it'll be our family. Kelly fell a little more in love with him right then. Over the next 2 hours, Nathaniel turned his home into a makeshift hotel. The library became a room for the single uncles, the game room housed the teenage cousins, and the office was converted into a space for the grandparents. Mr. Nathaniel, Margaret whispered as she passed by carrying stacks of towels. May I say you're handling this with impressive grace? Margaret, Nathaniel replied, helping carry sheets. If I survived the past few months with Kelly and Zoe, I can survive one night with the Evans family. The next day, the garden was transformed. Simple but elegant flowers decorated an improvised altar under the big tree where Kelly and Nathaniel had shared so many conversations. White chairs were arranged in small, cozy rows, and soft lights were strung through the branches, ready to glow as the sun went down. Kelly looked out the bedroom window and smiled. It was exactly what she had dreamed of, simple, warm, and full of love. Ready, dear? Her mother asked, adjusting the simple veil Kelly had chosen. More than ready, Kelly replied. The ceremony began with Zoe as the flower girl, wearing a white dress and carrying a pillow with the rings. She started walking down the aisle with serious determination, but halfway through she tripped on the carpet and landed on her bottom, sending the rings flying. Instead of crying, Zoe looked around, saw everyone smiling warmly, and started clapping for her own dramatic performance. That's right, sweetheart, Kelly laughed, walking over to help her up. Always finish with flair. During the ceremony, Kelly's Uncle Charlie, apparently misunderstanding the moment, began singing Amazing Grace, right in the middle of the vows, without a microphone and slightly off-key. Instead of stopping him, the whole family joined in, turning the interruption into a beautiful, spontaneous moment. When it was time for the vows, Kelly held Nathaniel's hands and looked into his eyes. Nathaniel, she began, her voice steady but full of emotion, you've shown me that courage isn't about shouting, but about walking through curtains. That family isn't perfection, it's acceptance. That love doesn't fix everything, but it makes everything possible. Kelly, Nathaniel replied, his voice thick with emotion, you taught me not to fix everything, but to feel everything. You showed me that messes can be beautiful, that control is an illusion, and that sometimes the best things in life show up disguised as complications. The kiss that followed was sweet, gentle, and interrupted only by Zoe running up to hug both their legs, creating a moment Kelly knew she'd never forget. Family, Zoe announced, and this time, Kelly was sure everyone heard it. The celebration that followed was exactly the kind of organized chaos Kelly had learned to love. Her grandfather took over the microphone all night. Uncle Jimmy managed to eat half the cake before the toast, and 3 different cousins spilled wine on their clothes during the speeches. But when Kelly danced with Nathaniel in the garden under the soft lights, With Zoe sleeping in Margaret's arms and her loud, crazy family singing off-key in the background, she knew she wouldn't change a thing. "No regrets?" Nathaniel asked, twirling her gently. "None," Kelly smiled. "Well, maybe we should have hidden the cake better. Note to self for our anniversary party," Nathaniel laughed. "Already planning the next party?" "Kelly Vanderbilt," he said, testing out the name. "I'm planning the rest of our crazy, wonderful life." And as they danced under the stars with the sounds of family and love all around them, Kelly thought that some of the best stories really do begin with the courage to walk through a simple curtain. What did you think of Kelly and Nathaniel's story? Let us know in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What's your score? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell to follow all our stories. And don't forget to check out more touching stories right here on the end screen.